All right, Jen, thank you so much for joining Courageous Conversations today. And so I got to know you in a multitude of different ways, but for our audience, this might be the first time they get to meet Jen Harper. So who's Jen Harper?
Oh, thank you. Well, it's so nice to be here. Thank you for having me. I am a lot of things. I'm a mom, wife, and then I'm also the founder of a company called Cheekbone Beauty Cosmetics. And our whole mission from the beginning to where we are now was about really empowering Indigenous people, including myself. But the mission of the brand is to create color cosmetics that are vegan, clean, and sustainable, that leave less of an impact on the planet. But we want to make a big impact in our community. And we use the color cosmetics, if you will, as a vessel to be able to do that. I don't have the traditional path into the beauty space, but it has been quite the journey nonetheless.
So
Okay.
you don't have a traditional path into the beauty space, but I think your path is really important. So how did you find yourself in this industry?
Have always been like an avid lover of beauty and makeup and skincare and all the things that come along with that. And so what happened, I was in my old job, which was selling seafood. I was a sales company. And in January of 2015, I had like a literal pop out of bed, middle of the night dream. And this is all I remember from the dream is these three native little girls. They're covered in lip gloss. And I remember their brown skin and rosy little cheeks. And the thing that stands out to me the most is like this giggling and laughter and this joy that they had. And so literally woke up that evening, grabbed my laptop, and started writing what is like the foundation of our brand. And that was originally to create a product. At the time, it was just a lip gloss. And I wanted to use a portion of profits to do something to support my community. Now, it we really have to like think about the time and space that I was in and the world was in, because I think this has a lot to do with me continuing to build and work on this brand. Because who actually ever has a dream and then just gets up and starts doing it, right? That would be insane. So I was a big fan of brands like Tom Shoes, where it's this concept of like social impact, right? Like Patagonia, it's like we aren't just here for business. There was being good was done around the brand. And so I really love that idea. And I was learning at that time about the residential school system in Canada and the negative impacts that that had on First Nations people. And so I learned that my grandparents both survived residential school. And in 2015, just after having this dream, this is when the final report was released and launched from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And I was reading through this and really seeing and learning for the first time in my life. I was a 38-year-old Ojibwe woman from Canada and recognized that all of the dysfunction or trauma that I had witnessed throughout my life and my family, there was a reason for it. I was like, had this real aha moment, like, oh my goodness, we're not just screwed up. Like, there's a reason why my poor grandmother had a hard time raising children. And then we've learned now as a society, there's like science around this, that families that have traumas in them, that gets passed down unless someone decides to end it and end it properly. And all of the things that go along with that. And so I learned that my grandparents are faced with this an event, which was the residential school system. They weren't equipped to deal with it, and then had children and passed it on to them, and ultimately passed it on to me and my siblings. And so learning that. And then I also personally had just become sober. So in November 26th to be exact, of 2014, I get sober. So I had battled alcoholism, which I then learn is a symptom, much like violence and suicide these are all symptoms now of the residential school system and of that kind of trauma. And really decided that, okay, I am really working hard to make these changes. I'm transforming myself. Is it possible to do something with this idea, this brand, this dream I had? Is it possible to show my community that we can be in charge of our own minds and our own lives and make changes? And instead of living in this space of constant trauma, can we make changes like this for our families? And it really does start on the individual level. And, I'm really grateful that this last year I celebrated 10 years of sobriety. So we're like literally 10 years into that and 10 years into building Cheekbone Beauty, because the initial dream happened in that January of 2025. So it's been quite the path. And we obviously didn't just go from dream to like we have all the products and now we're in the market. There's a tons of steps along the way, tons of mistakes, but I think the message that I carry and I realize as I've been building this is it's about so much more than the makeup we're making. I really do feel like I have a place in my community where I can be an example for next generations or women who are struggling with maybe something and don't feel like you can overcome these things. I know when I was struggling, I always was looking for someone or something to help me see that change is possible. Because when you struggle with something like an addiction, it is truly a time when you feel hopeless. And there's nothing worse than that kind of hopelessness. And I really believe that this is like my purpose is to share this journey so that it hopefully can help one person.
Okay. That, wow, that's a lot. Yeah, I'm, like, taking a minute to like digest because you said that and it just like it doesn't sit heavy in my heart, but it definitely has some weight
Mm.
and not in a bad way. And so my brain went two ways when you started talking. And it had me thinking like this podcast is called Courageous Conversations. And a lot of what you've done forced you to be courageous in taking that first step, whether it was the first step to deciding to become sober and then opting into doing the work that comes with maintaining sobriety, or the
Hmm.
courage of waking up because you had a dream and say, I'm going to start something from a dream, because someone could be like, there are tons of makeup brands out there. Why do I need to do this? Why do I have to be courageous in any of these? So for you, when you're sitting there and you have these daunting, scary opportunities, decisions you were about to make at multiple points in your life, what allowed you, empowered you, or pushed you to step into those spaces courageously?
Yeah. Oh, such a great question. And I think about these kinds of things a lot. I recognize nobody does anything alone. Like, we're really fortunate that we, you know, have resources. I can tell you I tapped into every single one that was available in my community. And sure, I'm thinking about some places you go when you're desperate and struggling. And even like I was remembering recently, like being in a detox center, like I've relapsed, again for the how many time I did rehab and then would find myself in those places. And it's just maybe the most smallest conversations with people. And the people that work in those places, unfortunately, have to deal with a ton of stuff. But they're they're there and they have the tools. And this is literally, it is a toolkit in order to overcome these kinds of things in our life. And as tough as their job is, it's just the fact that it's available. So I'm really grateful that I live in Canada, and that those things are available and it's free, essentially, right? Because of our healthcare system, the way it operates. Um, and then you sort of you start the process into figuring out, is it possible to get better from this? And what, you know, I don't necessarily always agree with, I guess, all of the theory behind things like AA, because for me, being anonymous about being an alcoholic, I think was something that kept me sick longer, right? I'm like the opposite of anonymous. I tell everyone about my addiction, and once I did, I feel like I became accountable to not only my family but a lot more people, and perhaps that's been a big part of why I've been able to manage sobriety and stay sober for so long. Because when you look at the statistics of people overcoming addiction, it is incredibly low. and that blows my mind. Like, this is people recover under 5% when you have some form of addiction, and that's such a low number. And I was on a stage last week at an event where the three first panelists, we all had overcome addiction, and
Wow.
I literally was like, let's just take a moment, because this is so rare, even though this whole panel is people that have recovered and gone on to do really interesting things, but that doesn't happen on the norm. And so I think just recognizing that it was definitely a loving family community. There's so many things that I'm super grateful for, because I did not do this alone. And then, of course, for me, I am always grateful to the creator of the universe, because that is the only reason that I am alive today.
Wow. So we go back a little bit. 1 January, you were dreaming, and then 3 little native girls covered in lip gloss with rosy cheeks were the reason you woke up. And they inherently pushed you to step into this. And so, like, when you were describing it in my brain, I was like, this is such a pretty picture. And it was a pretty picture for a different, like, school, like, yes, children are pretty and lip gloss and like, I could see it. But when this joy in you telling
Yeah.
that story, the joy that you can hear in your voice and in what that sums up. And as a racialized woman, typically when you see us, it's not usually in places of joy. Even when our youth is characterized, we aren't usually shown in places of joy. So to know that that was part of like the inspiration for this, that it came from a place of joy. Yes, there was a
Yeah.
lot of things going on that weren't so joyful, but what the creator, the universe, spirit decided to give you to inspire change was joy. It wasn't hardship, it wasn't oppression, it was there's joy that exists inherent to our identities. Use this as your spark.
hmm
How does that sit for you? To sit there and know like it came from joy.
Yeah. And it's so interesting that you say this, because over the years, we have had so many people reach out to us to do so many things. And there's a lot of things we say no to and a lot of things we say yes to. And if it's not like literally igniting joy, it's definitely something we're going to say no to, right? Like
Yeah.
we had to be a brand that was based in love, or we built the company based on what we call the 7 grandfather teachings, which is an Anishinaabe teaching from my culture. Love is one of the teachings, and these are really all 7 of are like a set of values and principles. And the whole purpose of that was to make sure that Cheekbone Beauty's job was to be this soft place for people to land, right? Like, this
Yeah.
is, if you're going to land on our Instagram, you're not going to see hate. If there's hateful comments, we to this day delete them, right? They won't be there. We don't, this isn't an open forum for in dialoguing about
Mm.
the past wrongs of my people, right? Like, we're not going to get into that. We're here to make people laugh. We're here to bring joy back to our community, and that's really what we feel is such an important part of that brand, and absolutely 100% based on that dream. Like, this is the purpose of what we do, and it's not always easy, because the truth is a lot of horrible things have happened, still happen.
Yeah.
But as a brand, we've chosen that our position is the joyful one, right? This is that. It's not, we don't address those things, ever talk about them, don't support people working on those things. It's just that when you see the presence of Cheekbone Beauty, we just are really focused and know our purpose is to bring back joy. And that's what we're really trying to do. And it's not always easy, because this world is tough. We all know that.
Absolutely. I think even in your work to bring back joy into those spaces, you don't step away from hard conversations. Your
No.
brand has a stance and it's very open about its stance on supporting Indigenous communities, talking about the truth, faced by people in these communities. I can think about your MMW campaign with the red lipstick. Like you focus on joy, yes, but you're like, these are the realities faced by our people.
Yeah.
And you do so without being afraid that people will be like, oh, we don't want to buy from this brand. And I think that's a very brave and courageous thing to do, to still have a market that you're trying to work within, but you're like, we are people. And the people who make up this brand, this identity, this culture we bring forth have struggles that we need you to be aware of when you buy into our brand and our identity. So, how
A
do you
bit,
do
yeah.
it?
Yeah. I was like, I'm really ready for answering this. Um, so a portion of our plan when we market things is education, right? We give back in the sense when we think of our social impact, we create scholarship funds. That's about education. We educate people on ingredients and products, but there's also that layer of educating people on Indigenous culture and history. And the truth about history, which we've now learned, is not always what we thought in many cases. And
Yeah.
in particular, May 5th is Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women um, and All Other Relatives Day in Canada. And it's something that I think many people were so unaware of and still are. So, of course, it's a place where we use our platform, the Cheekbone Beauty platform, to discuss those things because it is just, yeah. And it's an issue that doesn't feel like it's stopping. It happens all across North America, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah.
There's serious, serious issues with how our people are treated when somebody from one of our tribes or nations goes missing, and it's so evident that it's so different than other communities. And I honestly know there's many different groups of people of color that have the same struggle.
No, it's what you say, definitely like shivers ran through my body as you were saying that, because I was watching the news recently and there was talking about the individual, the woman in Manitoba, when they finally
Hmm.
went searching through the landfills. And then
Yeah.
if we think about across the border in the US, there was a young girl
Yeah.
and talking
Like
about what happened.
14, like
Yes.
just a baby, really.
Like,
Like I have kids. Yeah, it's awful. And she's not the first, which is just the most tragic story. And there's obviously, obviously I'm getting my information from TikTok
yeah,
and I just want to be but these are where these things pop
yes.
up and then you do your own little bit of research and you're like, "Oh wow, this is like a real thing that's happening." And how can this many people go missing in one area and nobody be doing anything about it?
And it definitely makes you think about what news gets covered,
Mm,
what stories get
absolutely.
told. So, like, when we hear our stories being told in public spaces, we're usually on the offender
Mm,
of the system of white fragility, and white supremacy. But when
yeah.
we happen to be the victims, it's hush, it's
Yeah.
quiet, it's left
And
for
this
us to
has
do
been
the
happening
advocacy.
so long. Like I remember I used to keep this newspaper article. I probably still have it in my documents, but it was in a big Globe and Mail article. Like we're talking like 12 years ago now, maybe 14 years ago. And it's the first time when I recognized how serious of a problem it was. And it was when the Picton case from British Columbia, right, with all of the people that would go missing from Vancouver's downtown east side. And, family would go, and the people that work the streets would say there's something happening here, and nobody was paying attention to any of it. And they don't even have the actual numbers, like, but it's really high that this was one person that was targeting in an area where they knew no one would care when
Yeah.
someone would disappear. And that I remember reading that, and as a young person who was in my 30s, and I was still in addiction, and it's just like it's so painful. Like I remember feeling so much pain reading that because and a friend even said to me, she's like, "Well, look where you live, and somebody would say something if would happen if you went missing, right?" And I was like, "But would they? Like, would the police take it seriously?" They don't, you know what I mean? Like, it's just your friends assume because they see you And then it's also that assumption of like, kind of like how people feel that like, oh, because they're sex workers that
It's like,
or
who gets to
addicts, that it
matter?
doesn't matter, right? And that's painful to hear because I was also in addiction, even though not admitting it yet publicly. But
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, it's just really feeling the biases unconsciously that happens in society is painful sometimes. And I was not healed yet myself. I still had so much work to do. So that pain, it really it sat deeply with me for a long time. So it's an issue that is super painful. And there's so many communities across just Canada that I know people personally have lost family members that nobody is looking for. And that blows my mind.
And like, it continues to shock me that this gets to exist the way it does, because it now becomes the conversations that are had in like the public forum is on the validity and the value of their life versus someone
Yeah.
else's. And I struggle because I work from the concept that all life is valid.
Hmm.
All life is of value because it's here. Like, it's made it to this realm, so it gets to be like, it's of value regardless of what people end up doing or what they don't end up doing. They matter not because they're someone's sister or someone's brother or someone's friend or someone's
Yeah.
anything. They're just someone.
They're a human being.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it hurts. It hurts in a very
Yeah.
visceral way to be like, so what are the tides that change that mean I will be of value? What
Right.
will make me count
Yeah.
versus when will society say that I don't count?
And how do we make sure our children and these next generations never have to feel that way? That is
Yeah.
like, it's just, yeah, it's so much work. It really is. Um, and there's so much change that still has, like, we know this. We could, I'm sure you and I could probably talk about this for days, right? Like, it's just because it's part of our world. But
Yeah.
people ask me all the time, and it's one thing that I don't focus on is a lot of the negatives, or I would not be able to do the work that I'm
Yeah.
doing, right? If I sat and did that, I couldn't do the good stuff and feel, and that's the work where I feel really good in. And I think when I look at this kind of work, because I'm like, well, who's going to do the work? And I know there's people doing the work, and people come in and out of flowing and doing the work because that
Yeah.
kind of work is really hard.
It is.
I know lots of people in activism, and you can only do that for a said period of time without having to come in and out of it. And I see a lot in my community that have to do that, and that's so deserving of the peace that they need after years of working on these really hard things.
So I have a question for you, because the way you said that makes it sound like you're not doing the work, and I I disagree.
It's a different part of
Yes,
it.
I
It's a
was like,
different part of it. Never
absolutely.
allow me to go face the authorities on anything because I would just want to beat people up, and that's not good. I would
Um,
go like back to the streets level, and that's just
you're
would be
ready.
awful.
Like, no.
Yeah, exactly.
So for you, as someone who is building a company, building a brand, and also giving back and supporting in her community, how do you do it? Because while you do all those things, Jen, you're still a mom, you're still a person, you still have to get up and you look at the sun, and some days you're like, blanket, I don't want to.
Yeah.
Is it the dream of those three little girls that gets you up every morning? Or is there something else that keeps that fire burning?
Oh, yeah. Oh, um, so I've lost two brothers now, one to suicide and one to addiction. And one of them had children and one didn't. One's Indigenous and one's not, because I kind of grew up in my mom and dad had me, then they went off and had their own families, and so I grew up in these sort of two separate families, um, which is fascinating because it's like trauma doesn't matter. Trauma doesn't have a skin color, right?
No, it does not.
And they, when I think about literally trying to make the our space a better space, our world a better world for my nieces, my nephews, and really losing BJ was at the beginning of Cheekbone, and it really has continued to be the driving force behind why I'm still here, because this is really hard. I think anyone in entrepreneurship knows that it comes with these massive roller coaster days, and then, like you said, you have to all our life still is happening while you're trying to operate this business at the same time, and that's really hard too. And then tragedy will strike again, like it did for me last year, and you really think you're like, I can't survive. Like I felt that way last June. I was like, how am I gonna, like, you're just in so much pain again. And again, the reason why. So like you said, if your business has or the thing you're building, whether it's a group, something within a company that you already work for, like if you want to make change in the organization or you're working on projects, I really think the reason why we do these things has to be so strong to keep going, because it's really challenging. And my why is certainly being able, to tell both of my brothers one day that, that that I didn't give up.
Okay. So we're not gonna cry.
Sorry.
You can cry. So I've heard you talk about your brothers before. And I have the honor of getting to hear you talk about them again. And then it makes me think that you carry all this, one, so well. And it doesn't discount from how heavy these weights you carry are. You carry them with such grace, such eloquence, but such humanity to it as well. So the next question I ask is to talk to a little bit of that softer place in you. When you have these things that you're carrying which are so heavy, when you get a chance to rest, like we talked about the activists in these roles resting, how do you find rest? How do you find peace? How do you reignite those senses of joy?
So this is such a good question, because I've learned so much about the addict's brain that for me, working is what helps me heal, believe it or
Okay.
not. And so then, and I love working and I work a lot, but that's literally what fuels me. Like the work is what fuels me and keeps me going. Granted, there are times where I'm like, I need a break, and I always know when it's coming, and thankfully I have something planned or know when to do it, or have a day where, sometimes I really do shut everything off, because most days I don't. But I know when it's kind of like as you age, you get really mature, and and part of that is a lot of self-awareness. And so we're just recognizing, okay, now I do need a down day. I do need a day where I'm literally just gonna just do absolutely nothing. And it's rare that that happens, but I know when I need them and I take them. I do get to spend a lot of time with my family, which means my husband and my daughter. Um, my son, he doesn't love spending as much time with me as I would like to spend with him, but he gives me usually a couple hours a week at some point. And that fuels me as well, because my kids are now 22 and 19, and they're at ages where you can just have really wonderful adult conversations with them, which I think is just so fascinating. And they fuel me to keep going. But the work for me is, yeah, I used to feel really guilty about it too. That's why
Mm,
I'm actually just learning to accept that that's who I am and that's how I
okay.
work. Yeah, which took a long time, because people always talked about work-life balance, and you can't work that much, And I've just learned, well, I was an alcoholic, and now I'm completely probably what you would call a workaholic, but to me that's a healthier version. And I just know that
Mhm.
this is the addict's brain is different, right? And it's very different than somebody else's, and there's reasons why we do things, and I'm just accepting it now. I'm not feeling
Okay,
bad
I'm
about it
here for it.
anymore. Yeah.
No guilt.
So that's where I get
So,
fueled too, right? Like that's what
okay.
fuels me. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I'm gonna reframe how I think about work then from that a little, because like there are
And
times.
that doesn't work for everybody. Like I
No.
have really close friends who are like, I go in and I have to do my job, and it's like 9 to 5, and I shut it off and I turn it off and I'm done, and I could never go back and look like, and because and I'm like, this is the beauty of being a human. Like we all have different paths and
Yeah.
what we choose. But I certainly am fueled by work.
Okay. So the next question I'm going to ask dips a little bit more into parenting, because you and I have that in common. We are both parents to, well, mine is still a little human. Yours are what the world will say adult humans. So how do you take the lessons that you've learned from not just your business, but like realizing what trauma looked like in your family line? And how do you take those lessons and empower your kids directly? Not like my friends and I were talking earlier today about what it's like to break a generational curse. And that means a lot of things to different people, but to know what you experienced and not have it show up in how you parent. And how do you approach that so that you
Yeah.
give them the room to show up as themselves with a little less baggage than you had to show up with?
Yeah. So true. One was like I was so careful not to vilify alcohol as the problem, because alcohol is not the problem. Um, an alcoholic comes into this world. I don't know if they're born. I don't think they are. I think that the trauma along the way ensues how we tend to deal with those things. Um, and so really open and honest with them with those kinds of conversations. We talk about my kids were when I got sober, my son was 12 and my daughter was 8, and I was a serious alcoholic for probably 4 years. And so from like for my son, it was literally from 8 to 12, right? That he saw this, and he's old enough to know everything that was happening. My daughter remembers some of it because she was littler, but being so open with them. And they also, now that they're older, really express, yeah, this is where it really hurt me. And now to see this is where how what you've done and changed, like they're so obviously proud of that, but letting them express what hurt them and hearing them without me trying to ever get offended, which is always hard to do. And I've explained to them, like, it's, I will have this guilt for the rest of my life. That is, I just don't even expect that to go away. And it's not a guilt that is like burdening me every single day where it's weighing me down. It's a moment in a day where you were like, I absorb it and then I let it go through me and then I move on with the day. But it will affect, like, no one ever wants to do that to their children. And when you learn, um, I have 2 children, and they're literally, if you've ever, I read a book called the Children of Alcoholics, and it's like they have the symptoms, but in different ends of the spectrum, if you will. And it's just a lot of guilt comes with that. But I think being really honest with them and giving them the tools and opportunity and the path to make sure that they don't make the same mistakes. And I don't even like using that word, because you want them to, like you said, they be themselves and live their own life, but you also want to be here to be like, if they need the counsel,
Okay.
then I'm here to support that. Yeah, it's definitely a tough one, but I think just that open line of communication, and there is no expectation when I engage in these conversations, because they have their own feelings and have every right to have their own feelings about certain things.
I think I really like that, going into these conversations with your kids at the different ages that you go into conversations with them, but to have no expectations about how they're going to show up in those conversations, and to
Hmm.
give them room to interpret. Like, we have our intent in any of the things we do, and then the impact might be so far from our intent, but to give them the room to share with us what the impact of our decisions were for them. So I think I'm going to take
And
that.
it's really important for, you know, I got well and I've done all these things, but there are consequences to our behaviors as parents. And I own that and I have to. And I also think it's really important that as society we get that. Like, and to be perfectly honest, I look back and I'm like, I don't think I really understood how serious of a job, and I'm just being really truthful. Like,
Yeah.
parenting is the most serious job in the world. This is not like, yeah, let's have a child. And if I could go back, and I tell this to both my kids all the time, I would completely, obviously, make sure I was well and healed and understood how serious this job was. Even I was 25 when I got married, and I think 27 when I had my son. And I just remember, and my husband's 5 years older than me, but I'm just like, we had no idea what we were doing. Just even with a baby, like, there's no book they leave you with a hospital. But I think the one beautiful thing that I've shared with my kids, because of growing up with the parents that I had, and they've shared with me now, is parents are just doing the best they can with what they have. And that really helps you heal. It really does. Because that, if I had to really understand that about both my parents and their situations, for me to heal from the pain of my own childhood. And so hearing my now son say stuff like that back to me is super helpful as well.
I think there's a comment, like, meme thing that floats around the, like, social media space, is especially when it comes to like moms and their daughters. And it's like, my mom was just a girl. And
Mm,
I think that resonates very deeply. And like, I look back at my parents and I was like, the roles and the things I'm trying to figure out now, and I feel like I have no map, no guidebook that tells me this is
yeah.
exactly how you do it. I was like, they were once here. They had no map and no guidebook, and they had to do the best with the tools and resources they had.
And each kid is different too. One
Oh,
thing I
yeah.
just I said, these open, honest conversations. So to my son and daughter, it's just like, I didn't realize I needed to parent you both differently. Like, I
Yeah,
was doing it the same, but they needed a different mom
for each
just
of
for their
them.
different types of personalities, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. That's so beautiful. Like, I only have one, so right now I just have to,
Yeah.
I just have to be the one version that he
Yeah.
needs, and hope
Yes,
that I do
exactly.
it
Yeah.
well enough. And if I don't, know that he will one day realize that I was just a girl and
Yeah.
figure it
Yeah.
out.
And we all are. That's
Yeah.
just honestly, we're just all so imperfect as human beings. Um, and yeah, despite some of our best intentions, we are going to mess up, but we're all here for the most part. I want to believe we're all here just doing the best we can.
So we have a few more minutes of your time before I let you go off to doing all the marvelous things. So there are a few more questions I kind of want to get your take on.
Sure.
So the first is, I'm going to ask you to send a message back in time. So you get a chance. There's the trend on social media right now that I got to have a coffee with younger me.
Mm,
So
interesting.
if you get to have a coffee with younger Jen, and we'll go to the Jen the day before you took that courageous step,
Mm,
the day before you opted into not knowing how you'll do it, but knowing you wanted to, not just for Cheekbone Beauty, but sobriety and this new life that you didn't know was coming. So you got your phone rings. She calls you up. She's like, I want to go for coffee. If you, this version of you, showed up to have coffee with her, what would you like to tell her?
oh, wow. So this is just before that dream in January 2015, or younger Jen?
So you can talk to both. Let's say
Okay.
both of them are showing up to coffee. What do you want to tell both
Yeah.
Jens?
Um, well, the younger version is just like, how important it is to heal past wounds. And I just didn't take that seriously until I was much older. So I'd really want to tell her that. And I'd have to word it in a way where she would listen, because she didn't listen to anybody back then, like at all. And it's so crazy to me to think about how many people were trying to give me good advice and I was not listening, right? But this is so interesting about life, is when you're ready and willing to receive it is a big part of life as well, right? And so I would say that to younger her, but knowing her, I just don't know if she would listen anyway. And then after the dream, having a coffee with that Jen, oh wow, this is like closer, so I know more details. I think focus on like one thing at a time.
Okay.
You know, when you're working on this thing, you had this dream, like what is I think the outcome you wanted to see, and then focus on that as much as possible. For me right now, I think I should have focused on product earlier as opposed to later, because we have excellent products now, but it took us a long time to get here. And then it would be to like make time and space for more conversations with more people. I said no to a lot of things because I thought I was being focused by saying no, but I feel like over the years now, when I say yes to more things, you just get to enjoy more humans, more like that more human connection, which I think is such an important part of our life, that because of the digital and tech space, we maybe cut ourselves off from, and we don't have these coffees that we should as much. So I think saying yes to more stuff, as crazy as that sounds and as busy as I am, but in the earlier days, maybe that's when I should have done it more too. And it would have, I don't know, changed things. Maybe I would have met someone who said, focus on the product.
But
If
we're
I would have had
grateful.
a coffee. Yeah.
We're
No,
grateful.
and I'm great. And yeah, when you say those, but go back and give that advice, the truth is, despite really expensive errors I've made in building the business, despite I think all the mistakes in my life, when I think of the personal life, business life, all of those have made me who I am today. And I do really love this Jen, right? That's taken me a long time to say that.
Well, we love her too. Just we're glad you love her because we're a fan. And so I got 2 more minutes of your time before I set you back out into the world. And with that, I want to thank you,
Thank you.
because it takes a lot to answer a message from someone saying, "Hey, I want you to come up and share your story and talk really openly and candidly about things you might not normally get to talk about in your day to day, especially with someone you haven't built that like formative relationship with yet." So I want to thank you for coming up, for being open and brave and courageous with me and the people who'll get to listen to and watch this. And if you could leave our audience with one piece of advice on how they can be courageous themselves, if it's in the conversations that they're having, if it's stepping into entrepreneurship, or if it's taking the step to heal, whatever that means
Mm,
for them, what would it be?
be consistent. That's one thing I really share, that like you don't need a special skill for that. And I think the one thing I know I've done over the last 10 years plus for sure is just that consistency of like doing the thing for me to stay sober, it's consistency. And for me to build the business, it's consistency. Like I'm extremely consistent doing something to push the brand forward. And I have my consistent routine of like my early morning routine that keeps me grounded in where I am for each day, right? Be consistent, but just like worry about this one day kind of thing at a time.
Jen, thank you. so much. Like,
Thank
I
you.
appreciate you so much for agreeing and showing up in this space. And I'm glad
No
that I got
problem.
to meet you in person too. So,
Yeah.
it's,
No, thank you so much. This has been awesome.
well, I can't wait to hopefully chat with you soon.
Yeah.
And thank you for having a courageous conversation with me.
All right. Enjoy your day.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.